Welcome to the Planeswalker Project.
Hello Commanders! So in the EDH format, one of the most important aspects to your deck building process, aside from picking your favorite legendary, is incorporating mana ramp. And depending on your colors, you may or may not have such an easy time. Green decks seem to have the easiest time as they have access to a great many mana dorks. These are generally smaller creatures that can tap for mana, and certain cards can produce mana that isn't green. So today, we're going to take a look at the top 10 mana dorks in the Commander format. At number 10, we have Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, and Finehorn Elf. Yes, there are 3 cards, but these 3 1-drop green elves are all functional reprints of one another, so they all do the exact same thing. They produce 1 green mana when they're tapped. This kind of ability really doesn't have a whole lot of late game value, and after turn 7 or so, these generally will not have so much of an impact on the board state, which is why we've placed them so low. But as with all of our mana dorks, the later that we put them into play, the less impactful they'll be. Birds of Paradise comes in at number 9. This is another 1-drop mana dork, instead having flying on a 0/1 bird rather than on a 1/1 elf. What makes Bird of Paradise more useful is its ability to produce a mana of any color. This gives you some early game mana fixing that can help you get your commander out sooner. If you have, say, a 3-drop commander, this can give you a setup for a potential turn 2 commander drop. The downside is, other than producing mana of any color, the Bird of Paradise really doesn't do much else. With 0 power and only 1 toughness, it really doesn't offer much in the way of being an attacker, and it really can't trade with a creature in a block. But I will include it for its usefulness in being a flexible mana dork. Somber Sage takes our number 8 spot. A personal favorite of mine, this creature takes just a little bit more mana in order to cast, but the return on that cost is a lot more mana production. I love when creatures can produce more than 1 mana. 3 mana of any one color is a lot more useful than it might seem. The only drawback to it is the restriction to only creature spells, and while there are a number of mana producers in Magic that say you can only spend this mana on blank, creatures make up a good chunk of decks that can find a lot of use in this ramp. Devoted Druid will be our number 7 spot. This creature for a long time was vastly unnoticed in Commander, but with the release of Amonkhet, it found a whole new utility as a potential infinite mana piece. Unlike most mana producing creatures that get tapped once they're used, the Devoted Druid can put a -1/-1 counter on itself to untap, so then you can tap it again for mana. And normally you can only use this ability once before it gets 0 toughness and dies, but with the new card Vizier of Remedies, it reduces the number of -1/-1 counters placed on the card to 0, letting you infinitely untap and tap for mana. At number 6 we have Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. Selvala can function as a commander on her own as well as part of the 99. Whenever a creature hits the battlefield, if it has the highest power in play, its controller can draw a card. You can also pay 1 green mana and tap Selvala to add mana equal to the highest power among creatures you control to your mana pool. This mana can also be in any color combination. This is a great ability to use in a deck full of huge creatures, and if you have something like Paradox Engine in play, you can easily dump your whole hand into play and reuse Selvala multiple times. Dryad Arbor is number 5. Dryad Arbor, in my opinion, is one of the most unique cards in all of Magic, and it embodies the most green of green cards, as it's both a creature and a land. This is something we've actually yet to see elsewhere in Magic, and the Dryad Arbor is actually quite powerful. It does count as a land drop when you place it into the battlefield, and since it has no mana cost, the trade-off is you get a mana dork to use next turn for basically free. The best part about this card is that you can tutor this out very easily in Commander using Green Sun Zenith, choosing to pay 0 for the X cost, and it can be a very effective first turn ramp. At number 4, we actually have a tie of sorts. The Elvish Archdruid and Priest of Titania. They're very similar, which is why I've kind of clumped them in as number 4. These are 2 of the best mana producers for an elf tribal deck. Both of them allow you to tap them for mana based on the number of elves you control. The Priest of Titania, however, gives you a green mana for every elf in play, whether it's yours or your opponent's. The Elvish Archdruid only lets you use your elves in terms of the counting, but it also comes with a nice Anthem ability, giving your elves a much welcome boost. This comes at the cost of being 1 more mana to cast, but I mean, we're in elves, we're going to be bleeding mana before long. Bloom Tenders, number 3. This could have easily been in second just out of the sheer value this thing offers. The creature can tap to produce a mana of each color that you have under your control. So if you're running, say, Derevi, who breaks this card by the way, you can produce 1 each of white, blue, and green mana. If you add an Astronaut's Altar, you can get infinite colorless mana. You tap the Tender, get 3 colored mana, sack Derevi for the altar, you get 2 colorless mana, and Derevi returns to the command zone. Use 1 of the colorless mana and the 3 colored mana to use Derevi's ability to put her into play. Derevi then untaps the Bloom Tender, and you can lather, rinse, repeat. This is also highly useful in 4 and 5 color decks, as you can get a ton of mana colors out easily. Noble Hierarch will be our number 2 spot, and she's easily my favorite mana dork in my Rafik of the Many deck. A lot of times what you'll find is that the later that you'll draw your mana producing creatures, the less and less impactful they'll be for your game plan. Yeah, sure, you can get more mana, but if you already have 9 or 10 lands out, does that 11th mana source really do that much? Well, in the case of the Noble Hierarch, she has Exalted, an ability that is incredibly useful. If you attack with only 1 creature, any creature that has Exalted will give that attacker a little extra bump. Get enough of those bumps out and it will result in a lot of extra damage. In Rafik, perhaps the best general to use this card, I don't mind dropping it later in the game, as I'll definitely be able to use the extra Exalted trigger and power up something I want to sneak in. And at our number 1 spot, we have the Deathrite Shaman. One of the best things that you can have in a card is utility, and the more uses that a creature will have, the better it will perform and the more value it will offer your deck. Most mana dorks really only do one thing. They'll produce mana for a few turns and then be a chump block to an incoming Thragtusk. What makes Deathrite Shaman so absurdly useful is that it works as Grave Hate, it works as a burn spell, and it gives you life gain. If your opponent has any form of recursion or graveyard shenanigans, you can use the Deathrite to threaten their options. Say you have the Shaman in play and your opponent drops an Eternal Witness and they're targeting, I don't know, their Protean Hulk. You can pay 1 green, and with your Deathrite, suddenly they not only lose their target, but you gain 2 life. So that's a lot of mana we can produce with these creatures. What are your favorite mana dorks? Sound off in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, remember to tap that like button for a mana of any color, and I will see you guys in the next upkeep.